in your covenant. God, I pray as we open your word and we read these stories that we would see ourselves in our life in these stories. I pray that the words that are read and are spoken today would take root and plant themselves deep in our hearts, that they may bear fruit and form us evermore in the image of your Son, Jesus Christ, in whose name we pray. Amen. Genesis 35, we begin the story of Joseph. Joseph is the only child, the only son of his mother Rachel and his father Jacob. And over, even more than his other brothers, the Bible tells us that Jacob loved Joseph. He loved Joseph so much that he sort of spoiled him. Joseph grew up in a house where he knew he was the favorite, where he knew that he was different than everybody else. He reminds me sometimes of Graham in this way. If you watch Graham, sometimes when he hears a song that he likes that comes on the radio, or sometimes Kat and I will be very intentional about playing music around him, he will just break out and start dancing. And those of you that know 4-year-old children, you know the kind of dancing that only a 4-year-old can do. And he dances this very free way, like he is not self-conscious. He doesn't care what people think about him. He is enjoying the music and loving being a 4-year-old boy and loving being where he is and being who he is. And I'm convinced, and I want him to hang on to that as long as he can, because I'm convinced Graham is so confident that his mother and I love him, that he is safe, that he is valued and treasured, that he feels free just to express himself in these crazy ways, that as he grows up, no one in here would be caught dead doing that. We would all be so concerned about what people would think about us. But Graham, much like Joseph, he knows who he is, and he feels secure in that, and you can see it by his behavior. Chapter 35, go ahead, Ron, verse 1. It says, Jacob lived in the land where his father, that's Isaac, had stayed, the land of Canaan. Remember, the land of Canaan was the land that God promised to Abram, right? 2 generations earlier, where Abram was living in Haran, and God told him to leave his homeland and move to Canaan. Canaan was this promised land. So this is the account of Jacob. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. He brought their father a bad report about them. That means he tattled on them. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had born to him in his old age, and he made a richly ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him. They couldn't speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said, listen to this dream that I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, and I want you to imagine like what his brothers were thinking when they heard this. Like, yeah, you were binding sheaves of grain, Joseph. We do all the work. All you do is just kind of sit there and enjoy your nice coat. So we were binding sheaves of grain in the field. Suddenly, my sheaf rose, stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine, and they all bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, so do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule over us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream. He told his brothers, listen, guys, listen, I had another dream. You're going to love this. This time, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So I want you to get this picture, right? Joseph is so secure in who he is. He actually wears this reminder that he is loved, that he is special on the outside of his body. His father made him this ornate robe, is what the scripture calls it. We've heard it called like the coat of many colors. But basically this sort of physical representation that everywhere he went, from a ways off, you could look around, you could see, oh, there's Joseph. I can see him walking because he's wearing this big sort of gaudy little robe that sets him apart from everybody else. And he's the youngest in the family, and his older brothers that have been working hard for their father's approval. And here the youngest is getting all of these sort of perks of being this father's favorite. But he's so secure, he's almost like crippled in a way that he's sort of blind or like tone deaf to how he's coming across to his brothers. Because not once, but twice does he actually go to them to sort of brag about, hey guys, check out this awesome dream I had. You know how I'm the youngest and how I never have to do any work? You know how Daddy loves me best? And remember how it's totally unfair that I have all these special treatments more than you two? Well, guess what? I had this dream where you guys actually bowed down and worshiped me, right? So not to rub this in your face or anything, but they can't escape this little brat that walks around all the time and is sort of constantly rubbing their nose in it, that he is special, that he is loved. Now, we know what happens in the story. And I want us to get this understanding of the kind of person that Joseph was. Now, I'm not ever going to argue that what happened, Joseph deserved what happened next. Not at all. But what I want us to see is that Joseph, from the beginning, had a very clear sense of who he was and that he was somebody special. He was called out. He had special things were in store for him. So the story goes on, and we know how the story goes on. Go ahead, Ron. Chapter 45. That's not right. Verse 19. Was there not another passage there? Maybe I didn't add it. It's okay. Skip down to verse 19. You see the story continues. So his brothers are gathered. They're out in the fields working, and they're talking about how irritating it is to have Joseph as a little brother. And they have this great idea. They said, hey guys, why don't we lure Joseph out here, and then let's kill him, and let's tell our dad, let's blame it on a wild animal, and we'll say that it was an accident, and we can finally be rid of him. So that's what they do. Joseph is lured out. Joseph is told by his dad, hey, why don't you go check on your brothers, bring them some food, go and make sure that everything's going okay. And when he shows up, they capture him and they throw him into a cistern. Then they were so tired of doing that, they sit down to begin to eat their meal, and they notice this band of Midianites that are traveling, these slave traders that are coming around the area. They say, you know what? I got a better idea. Instead of killing Joseph, let's make some money off this guy. Let's sell him into slavery. On the one hand, you can say, wow, maybe Joseph deserved it. Can you blame him? He really was annoying. But on the other hand, I want you to try to imagine as this was an event that was going on in your family. What does it take for someone to betray their own flesh and blood like that? What kind of human beings would take their own flesh and blood and sell them into slavery, to truly betray them at that level? And then think about Joseph. Joseph, who was raised in this way. Joseph, who was told since he was young that he's special, that he's loved. That as long as you live under my roof, Joseph, no one will ever harm you. Nothing bad will ever happen to you. And every day when you put on this cloak, this robe, I want you to remember that your daddy loves you, and that you're special, and that you're going to grow up and you're going to do some very special things. And now you find yourself literally sold out and betrayed by your own family, by your brothers. You're put into a pit. Then you're taken out and you're sold to foreigners, bound for Egypt as a slave. And that's where you go. What does that do to someone? The story goes on from there. We're not going to spend a lot of time reading the text. It's a fairly lengthy story. But for chapter 39 of our text this morning, Joseph is sold into slavery where he works for this Egyptian official named Potiphar. And the Bible tells us that everywhere that Joseph goes, the Spirit of God is with him, and that everything he does sort of prospers. That when he's put in charge as the slave over Potiphar's house, that Potiphar's house begins to flourish and begins to prosper. Potiphar trusts Joseph so much that he sort of leaves him in control and puts him in charge of everything. And people like Joseph, including, we know how the story goes, Potiphar's wife. So the young boy from Israel who's sold into slavery by his brothers finds himself in a situation where things may be actually kind of beginning to turn out okay, except that the boss's wife seems to have a crush on me. And time again, she tries hard to seduce Joseph, to put Joseph in a position where he either has to betray his master, he would betray Potiphar, Or he would betray his faith. He would betray God. He would betray his covenant that makes him who he is. And time again, Joseph decides to no, I'm going to be a man of integrity. I'm going to stand up for what's right. It would not be right for me to do this, so he refuses her. So much so to one time it even gets so aggressive. She becomes so aggressive with him, she actually grabs onto his clothes, and when he runs away, she rips it off him, so he actually flees naked, and she has his cloak in her hand. Then Potiphar comes back, and she is so upset, she complains to her husband, do you know what this slave boy did? This slave boy's been making advances on me, and he tried to seduce me, and he tries to force himself on me. I can't keep him away. Look, here's his cloak. It's proof. This is what kind of a bad person he is. So she betrays Joseph. She sells him out. She slanders his good name. And while Joseph has done nothing wrong, Potiphar throws him into prison. To follow the story of Joseph, we have a boy who is loved, who is special, a boy who is told constantly what a special boy is, to a boy who's betrayed by his family, sold into slavery, to a boy who is betrayed unfairly and wrongly by his boss's wife. He's put into prison. Now he's in prison, but guess what happens when he's in prison? It says the captain of the guard begins to learn that Joseph is a good prisoner. He's a model prisoner. Everything he does, the prison begins to prosper and to flourish with Joseph there and Joseph in charge. So Joseph actually gets put in this sort of position of authority within the prison, and he begins to make friends. And two of the friends that he makes in this prison, that is a very special prison where prisoners, the Bible says, where prisoners of the king are kept. He makes friends with the royal baker and the royal cupbearer, right? They become friendly, and they tell Joseph, both of them say, Joseph, we had these dreams that are really troubling us. You seem like you're a wise man. You seem like you know your business. You're a man of integrity. We can trust you. Would you mind giving us some advice? So the cupbearer tells Joseph of this dream that he has, and Joseph listens to the dream and says, hey, I have some good news for you. This is a good dream. Because this dream, what this telling me is that in no time, you're actually going to be released from prison. You're going to be restored to your former post. You're going to actually be the cupbearer to Pharaoh. Good things are going to happen. Rejoice, you should be glad. The baker here just says, wow, it's really good news. Well, maybe, you know what? Listen to my dream. Maybe you give me a good report about my dream. And the baker tells Joseph his dream, and Joseph listens and says, oh, sorry, buddy. This is not good. You're about to be free from prison, but when you're freed from prison, you're going to be taken from here and you're going to be impaled. You're going to be executed. And the birds are going to eat your eyes, like all these really dark dreams. It says, oh, that's kind of scary. Well, come to find out, things transpire exactly the way that Joseph predicts it. And Joseph tells his friend, the cupbearer, he says, now listen, when you go back into the service of Pharaoh, I want you to remember me. Remember that I'm here. Remember I'm in prison. Remember the kind of man that I am, and put in a good word for me for Pharaoh. So we have the little boy who is special, born into privilege, who is sold into slavery by his own family, betrayed by his family, betrayed by Potiphar's wife, put into prison, and now maybe he has a moment where things can go right, and the cupbearer forgets his promise to Joseph and doesn't remember Joseph to Pharaoh. Joseph stays in prison for several more years. Things are going from good to bad to worse all the time. Story goes on. Pharaoh has a dream, this really weird dream about these really skinny, gaunt calves that come up out of the Nile, and they walk on the land and they see these skinny calves find these fat calves, and the skinny calves eat the fat calves, and the skinny calves they stay skinny, and Pharaoh doesn't know what it means. And he asks his wise men, he said, anybody tell me what it means? No one can tell Pharaoh what it means. But then, finally, the cupbearer remembers, you know what? I made a friend in prison. His name's Joseph. He can tell you what it means. So Joseph is called before Pharaoh. Joseph says, Pharaoh, here's the dream. God's telling you that there's going to be a time of famine that's coming. But you have these years. You have some years to prepare for the famine. And so what you should do now, you should grow grain. You should store grain. You should put away and save your food, because there's going to be a time for the famine, and you can survive this famine if you'll act now. Pharaoh is so impressed. he says, you know what, that's exactly what we're going to do. And Joseph, guess who's going to be in charge of it? You are. So Joseph is made second in command of all of Egypt. Now, the last sort of movement of this story. And again, I want you to think about yourself when you hear this. Joseph's been betrayed his entire life. We don't know how old he was when he was sold into slavery, 17, right? He was a youth, a young man. We don't know how old he is now. But for the vast majority of his life, Joseph has existed in a world where everybody has been against him. Where every time that circumstances might have changed to where he thought, finally now I can catch a break, where I haven't done anything wrong. All I've tried to do is to be faithful and to follow the example that I learned from my father, to try to live up to this promise that I had when I was a son, that I had these dreams that I had, that I knew I was special because of who my father was and who my family was. But at every turn I get betrayed by my family, betrayed by my boss, betrayed by the people that I was even in prison with. At every level I'm betrayed. Finally, he says, maybe now I have what I finally deserve, this position of power, and the famine comes true. Guess who comes to his front door? Guess who shows up in Pharaoh's court, where Joseph is presiding? His brothers. Remember the ones that started Joseph on this really dark, horrible road? The ones who betrayed him to begin with? Because there was a famine in Canaan just like everywhere else, and his brothers had gone to Egypt because the word around the world was, you know what, there's food in Egypt. This famine is bad, but in Egypt they're prepared. They have food. They can give you food if only you would go to Egypt. So his brothers go to Egypt, and they present themselves to Joseph, not knowing who he is. And here they are at the mercy of Joseph. Now, put yourselves in their position. I remember I had sisters growing up, which everyone knows are worse than brothers, right? Sisters are by far worse than brothers. You live with your sisters, they do things that are going to make you mad. They will talk on the phone when it's your time to talk on the phone. You know, in my house growing up, when I was a teenager, I was always had so many girls that wanted to talk on the phone with me because I was just that kind of guy. And the way my parents handled it was we have specific times where we could talk on the phone. From 8:30 to 9 o'clock, Clint, that's your time. From 9 o'clock to 9:30, Allison, that's your time. Well, you know, here's the deal. There was one time when I was on the phone with this really hot girl. Her name was Kat Graham. Went to school together, and we were having this really great conversation. She was really into me. I was into her. And it was 9 o'clock. It was Allison's time. And I wanted to talk for a little bit longer, and Allison came in, and she was like, you know, Clint, you better get off the phone. Clint, get off the phone. It's my time. I said, give 5 more minutes, 5 more minutes. Finally, at 9:02, she pulled the cord out of the wall and said, no, you're done. You're done. That made me mad. That hurt me. Then, I remember this, check this out. A couple weeks later, Allison was out on a date with a boy, and the boy dropped her off at home, and I happened to be looking out of the window when they dropped off, and I saw them kissing in his car. And Allison came in, and I said, hey, Allison, how was your date? How did he taste? How was his breath? And she said, oh, you saw? I said, yeah, I saw that. Don't tell mom and dad. Oh, really? You don't want me to tell mom and dad because you would be in trouble. And here is my sister at my mercy. Now, how do you think I responded? I told my mom and dad immediately. She was grounded for 2 weeks. And that was great. Now, that's a silly story, okay? Story that we all deal with. But think about the profound level of betrayal that Joseph had experienced. Think about our own lives. We were talking in class this morning, in Bible class, that, man, life is hard. You live long enough, you're engaged in relationships long enough, you experience this sort of deep betrayal where people hurt you. And you're put in position, you're like, man, I don't deserve the way I'm being treated. I did nothing but try to, live my life the best that I know how, and these people are being very unreasonable and are hurting me and betraying me and selling me out and hurting me and hurting my family. This is not okay. And now Joseph's in a position where here they are at his mercy. He could treat them however that he wanted to. With a snap of his finger, he could say, no food for you, and destroy his family, destroy his brothers. He could say, hey guys, remember me? Remember what you did to me all those years ago? Well, look at me now. And I bet you're hungry, huh? I bet you wish you had some of this food. Well, payback's tough, isn't it? Go home. And by the way, tell your mother I said hi. And slam the door. He could have done that. Go ahead, Ron. Chapter 45. Chapter 45. We get Joseph's response. If you know the story, he kind of strings them along a little bit about, whether or not he's going to help him out. And he plants this silver cup, and Benjamin, who is Rachel's other son, in his sack, and kind of makes him really worry about his safety. But ultimately, this is chapter 45. Verse 1 says, Joseph could no longer control himself before his attendants, and he cries out, have everyone leave my presence. There was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. He wept so loudly, the Egyptians heard him. Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I'm your brother, Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, don't be distressed. Don't be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives. God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there's been famine in the land. For the next 5 years, there'll be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance, a great redemption. So then it was not you that sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, Lord of this entire household and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father. Say to him this. Say, this is what your son Joseph said. God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen, be near me, your children, your grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all that you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household will all belong to you, will become destitute. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded me in Egypt and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly. Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin embraced him, weeping. He kissed all his brothers, wept over them, and afterwards his brothers talked with him. So here's the takeaway for me from the story of Joseph. It's not that in this life we're going to face trouble. We've heard that sermon. We're aware of that. We know, Jesus says, if you want to come follow after me, you must deny yourselves, take up your cross, and follow me. We hear Peter that says, if you suffer, when you suffer, don't look around as if something strange were happening to you. But it said rejoice, right? Because your sufferings produce, or James says your suffering is about producing perseverance, and that it's all part of the process. We're going to experience hardship. But also, it's not this. It's not that we know that true faith in God is not determined by our circumstances, that faith in God determines what we do in spite of our circumstances. We've heard that sermon, and we've seen that in the lives of Adam and Eve, in the lives of Abraham and Isaac. We've seen where even though circumstances would be against him, they encounter resistance, where faithfulness means I choose to follow God even when things aren't going my way. We know that. What I'm taking away from the story of Joseph is this right here. It's chapter 45. Because everybody experiences suffering. Everybody experiences hardship. No matter whether you're a Christian or a pagan, or whether you're a believer or you're lost, no matter who you are or where you live, you experience hardship in life. People betray you. People treat you wrong. And you have to suffer these things merely just because you're alive. But when that happens to people, when it happens to me, I see this in myself and I see it in other people. That can become a very toxic, damaging force in your lives where you become these people that are bitter, that are angry, that are hateful, that live only to get revenge, that live only to complain, only to spread more dissension and division, only to get even with those people that you think hurt you. And if you can't do that, you're determined to make everybody else miserable. Many of you know people like that. Many of you can recognize that in yourselves. I know that I can. Don't you know Joseph had every right and every reason to be this bitter person who used his power and used his position as a weapon to wield, to hurt, to get revenge, to get even with his brothers and with those people who hurt him. But what I take away from the story of Joseph and what I want us to hear this morning, what I want to see in myself, is the kind of person who, even though he's been betrayed, even though he's had to suffer this difficulty, is the kind of person who responds to betrayal with grace, who responds to suffering with love, who responds instead of with vengeance, he responds with kindness and tears of joy, kisses, hugs. How do we do that? How do we become those kind of people? Two scriptures I want us to take note of, and I think this is reflected in the story of Joseph. Notice how Joseph, when he finally reveals himself to his brothers, the way that Joseph describes his predicament. Every step of the way, even when I'm up here describing it to you about what happened, we describe it in these terms. Joseph's brothers betrayed him, so he was sold into slavery. Potiphar's wife was a liar, and so her lies put him in prison. The cupbearer to Pharaoh was a liar, or was selfish, or was forgetful, and didn't remember his promise that he made to Joseph. So every step of the way, it was people's selfishness, people's anger, people's jealousy, people's betrayal. It was other people's just negative, brokenness. Those were the things that were driving the story. Ask Joseph, say, Joseph, how did you end up where you were? And he says, it's very simple. God put me here. God sent me ahead of you, he says. God knew what was going on. God knew what was happening. It was God that brought me through it. God brought me in it. God put me to this place for his greater purpose. You see, Joseph had the kind of faith that I want to have. The kind of faith that says, even though I can look around and be defined and consumed by all the people around me, that I can say, oh, you're hurting me, and you're not doing this right, and you're making me angry, and you're betraying me. Instead, Joseph sees the world through the lens of faith, which says, God's still faithful. God's still working. God's still moving. And as long as God is faithful, then I know that I'm going to be okay. And I know that I can find joy. 1 John chapter 4 says this, talking about how we live with each other. We love because he first loved us. If anyone says, I love God, yet hates his brother or sister, he's a liar. Anyone who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God who he has not seen. He has given us this command: whoever loves God must also love his brother and sister. So amazing to me. I think it's very telling. Most of the New Testament deals with how we understand God, how we understand who we are in light of who God is and who Jesus is. But then, in an equal part, how do we live in relationships with other people? Jesus says the greatest commandment is this, that you love God with everything that you have, but then really also is that you love other people. In my experience, whenever we fall victim to bitterness, whenever we fall victim to the sin of vengeance, the sin of hatred, the sin of bitterness, it's not other people that are the problem. It's not about us just just get over it. Just let it go. Just have the inner fortitude and the strength of character just to let it slide what people do to us. But as John says in 1 John 4, and as we're going to read here in a minute, to me the real problem becomes we don't understand God the way that we should. Because if your faith in God, if your relationship with God, if your understanding of God was so full, was so big, was so strong, was so prevalent, so dominant, and so definitive in your life, that would block out everything else, that you couldn't see or think or speak or act in any other way except that God came into it. John says, if you really love God, if that's the biggest thing about you and the most important part about your life, then of course you're going to love your wife. Of course you're going to love your children. Of course you're going to love your boss. Of course you're going to love your church. Of course you're going to love other people. Otherwise, you don't really know God. Jesus says it like this in Matthew chapter 18. Peter asked Jesus a really good question. He says, Jesus, how many times should we forgive people? 7 times, right? I mean, that's a lot. Forgive people 7 times, right? They hurt me 7 times. Joseph wasn't even hurt 7 times. I think if you keep track, it's probably like 4 or 5. But 7 times forgive people. Jesus says, no, not 7 times, 77 times. It's a good 7 times is a good start, but 77 times. Therefore, he just tells a parable. The kingdom of heaven, it's like this. It's a king who wanted to settle accounts with the servants. He begins to settle them. A man who owed him 10,000 talents, or read that, 10,000 bags of gold was brought before him. And since he was not able to pay, the master ordered he and his wife, his children, and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. The servant falls on his knees before him and says, be patient with me, he begged. I'll pay back everything, I promise. The servant's master took pity on him and said, okay, we'll put you on a payment plan. You got 2 years to pay back this debt. No. He says, you know what? Forget about it. He cancels the debt, lets him go. When that servant went out, so read this as literally in the next minute after he leaves this meeting with his master, he goes out, finds one of his fellow servants who owes him 100 denarii, right? So imagine, sometimes you read it as 100 silver coins, or so read 10,000 bags of gold versus 100 silver coins. He grabs him, begins to choke him out, and says, pay back what you owe me. Pay me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, says, be patient with me. I will pay you back. Sounds familiar. But he refused. Instead, he went off, had the man thrown into prison so he could pay back the debt. When the other servants saw what happened, they were greatly distressed and went and told their master everything that had happened. The master called the servant and said, you wicked servant, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? In anger, his master turned him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. Kind of this is how much your Heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother from your heart. Kind of a dark story, and we hear that story and we think, wow, that guy is a real jerk, right? You believe that guy? He was forgiven 10,000 bags of gold. Forgiven, like it was never happened. Then he goes out and tries to strangle this guy that owes him the equivalent of like $10. Can you imagine how hard-hearted and cold that man is? But remember the point of this. How do you become the kind of person that can forgive? How do you become the kind of person that's able to exist in the loving, redemptive, grace-filled, kind relationship with your brothers and sisters, even when, and especially if they betray you and wrong you the way that we all do to one another from time to time? Jesus says, well, first, it begins with knowing God and understanding God. If you can't forgive, if you can't let it go, the problem isn't that what they did to you was just that wrong, or you don't have the strong enough character. The problem is that you don't really have a good enough relationship with God. That when you understand how God offers us this kind of forgiveness every day, then it does something to your heart. I'm going to offer an invitation. We're going to say a prayer. We're going to stand, and Noah's going to come lead